Every time I push the go live button, by the way, Carrie, there's always some new thing there. Like now StreamYard's like, well, don't you want to just use an intro video? I'm like, that's how we made our show. So we are excited today because we're going to drag some new person into our clutches and ask them questions. Dori Baker, author of a bunch of different books. We're going to talk about a couple of different ones. There's all kinds of thoughts about leadership. There's thoughts about how to build great mental health, how to do all kinds of care for people, a million things we're going to cover. It is shenanigans how much we're going to get done. Let's start a show, shall we?
Hi, everyone. Tim Kitzrow from NBA Jam and NFL Blitz, welcoming you to The Backpack Show. Your hosts, Chris Brogan, Kerry Gargone, Boom Shakalaka.
Backpack Show.
Today was puppy party for me. I looked at the puppy party people. What'd you look at?
I looked at Jesse Cole because I was thinking about the fact that he just celebrated his 9th anniversary with his wife and that the Savannah Bananas is also 9 years old. And the fact that that organization started right around the time they got married and that they still somehow have stayed married is shenanigans to me. But who knows?
That's such an interesting story. If you haven't checked out Jesse Cole and the Savannah Bananas, we've interviewed him a couple of times because he's just that interesting. But that's a story worth hearing. At one point, they were in an empty stadium, like stripped down to the bolts, trying to figure out how to bring baseball back to Savannah, which had not successfully had a team for years and years. So anyhow, check that one out. But that's another inspiring story. We have our own new one today with Dori Baker.
So I'm going to drag Dori in. We'll say hello to her, and we will ask a few questions, and we'll get a little sense of what's going on in the world. Dori, hey, welcome to this. Thanks for coming to the Backpack Show.
Hi, everyone. I'm really happy to be here.
You've got a bunch of different titles out there. One of the ones I knew from before current work, Another Way. You've done all kinds of stuff with the care model is another thing that I know about from you. How do you sum up the area where you approach and tackle things? What's the thread that goes through everything that you're working on?
That's a good question. The thread is I have always just had a radar for young people. I'm very interested in young adult culture, and I can kind of see how they're getting bombarded. And so I've spent my career nurturing their vocations, like how do they find meaning and purpose? And most recently, I realized there was a mental health epidemic affecting them. And I realized you can't think about meaning and purpose if you can't get out of bed in the morning. So the thread going through my whole career has just been like this passion for young people. And I believe they can all be leaders if they get plugged into the right places.
I think a lot of people now, young and old alike, are struggling with isolation, depression, anxiety. And I don't know if it's in greater numbers than before, but I know it seems to be just everywhere. So have you found in your travels, is there something that cuts across even generations to
Oh,
help people find
absolutely.
connection and
Absolutely.
belonging?
Yeah, we're living in such highly anxious times. We, yesterday had a hurricane sweep through Florida. 2 days before that, we were still recovering. We're still recovering, still getting news out of North Carolina. There's wars here, there's wars there. We are living in highly anxious times. And because we're watching it all play out on our phones, we are feeling it in our bodies. So my antidote, what I've learned and what I've begun creating with a cadre of young people from across world traditions, from across race and ethnicity, is soulful practices. What are the practices that we can do that help kind of calm us down when we're having an anxious day? And so I spent yesterday with 20 women just a little bit north of Boston, and we were exploring what are some of the practices that can remind us that we're going to be okay. And we actually have brain research now that shows that these practices light up a part of the brain that mitigate anxiety and depression. So I'm all about that. And I think they can be playful, fun, evocative, and creative. They don't have to be boring. They don't have to be sit quiet and meditate.
One thing I like about your soulful practice is that there's a mix. Like it's not just looking at your belly button, so to speak. You're not just doing mindfulness and meditation. There's a whole part about community and community and hospitality. How did that get mixed into it? And what is the purpose and the value of adding things like community and hospitality to your soulful practices?
Oh, that's a really good question. And I can go on and on. So raise your hand when you want me to stop. In former times, we had neighborhoods, we had, associations. We were seeing other people daily, on the daily, and community was baked in. Now the bridges to many of those places where we would go for communal support are broken. I have a friend who says, Dori, they're not just broken. Somebody threw a flame and gasoline on it. Like the bridges, especially to institutions that were once places of refuge, sanctuary, literally. Those bridges are gone. And a lot of times that's for good reason. I mean, I come out of working with a lot of people who've been harmed by religious institutions. The church has not been a friend to many, many of the young people I know today. And so my goal is to wonder and create ways to keep those practices available, even though we don't expect anyone right now, or maybe never, to go back to those institutions in the same ways.
What kinds of practices are we talking about?
Yeah. Let me talk about the practices. And as I do so, this is still answering Chris's question. There's a wealth of practices out there on the internet for your well-being, but doing them alone is not the same as doing them in community. And knowing that you have someone else to remind you to connect, or to maybe, call if you're not able to get out of bed this morning to do a certain thing you like to do, it's good to do them in community. So here's some of the practices. I got up this morning, I got my cup of coffee, I keep it on a timer. First thing I do is go outside in the grass barefoot. It's physiologically shown that earthing gives us more resilience. There's electric stuff coming out of the ground, and I don't know the science of it, but it helps us literally ground and center for the day. So I start my day outside. The other beautiful hack is 3 minutes of sunshine without your glasses on helps your serotonin reset so you can get a good night's sleep. We all know how important a good night's sleep is. So right there, in the first 5 minutes of getting out of bed in the morning, I've already done two what I call soulful practices, because I've slowed down and I've reminded myself that there is something more than me in the world, holding me, maybe supporting me, maybe even drawing out the best in me for the day. So those are just two of them, but we're writing about 20 or 30 of them that come from a lot of different places, and not all of them appeal to me, and not all the ones I use will appeal to other people, right? So there's got to be a great mix, creativity and diversity. I'll talk about a few more of them in a minute.
Yeah, I want to dig in on one thing, because I want to use different words than you might use, or maybe you'll agree, or whatever. Maybe we'll have to fight. To your point about church and religion has really started to have reasons why not to help our youth and things like that, or at least they've concocted reasons why not. And what I feel like you're saying is not necessarily in place of, because we don't want to get beat up by those guys, alongside of, these are restoring some of the experiences that we used to have in healthy church communities. And you're just doing it sort of taking some of the bits of it and putting it in a context that might be a little more reapproachable, which is not a word, to younger people. How close am I to what you're saying?
You're exactly right. I'm on the edges. I'm still 1 foot in, 1 foot out. And I feel like that's a really fruitful place to be. Let me just tell you another practice that I just love. It's called rainbow basking. And I have prisms all over my house. My 6-year-old godson walks into the kitchen one day and there's a rainbow on his forehead. His 10-year-old sister notices it. And we're like, ooh, just stay there. What's it like to bask in a rainbow? And then a few weeks later, I was talking with a friend of mine who was pregnant, who happens to be the chaplain at a campus in Richmond, Virginia. And I was like, oh, let's go to your chapel and see if you have any rainbows. And we put her pregnant belly in the middle of that rainbow that was refracting from that stained glass window. And we just basked in who is this new being coming to life, and how are they created to be exactly who the world needs right now, exactly who they need to be. And then I started wondering, what would it be like if kids on college campuses repurposed stained glass windows, or found a place to hang a prism, and just let's have a flash mob and go bask in a rainbow in which we remember that we have divinity within us and we're reflections of that. And you can play with the science if you want to, or you can just go bask in a rainbow. And like that's one of the fun ones. It has tiebacks to ancient traditions. You know, the rainbow has always been repurposed for religious purposes, but here's a way that we're just recreating it and having some fun with it. Another one we like is to honor the new moon. You know, like it's got pagan practices, it's got ancient Hebrew practices. What does it mean to like notice what's going on in the world that's bigger than us and set an intention for the next few days as you see that moon get bigger? Those are the kind of things we're playing around with.
I read a book maybe, gosh, I don't know, 20 years ago called Bowling Alone, about the kind of like the fact that a lot of the institutions for social connection in our own communities are gone now. Like there's not bowling leagues. There's not like Tupperware parties. I mean, sometimes your friends will want to sell you stuff. It's a whole other thing still, but not like the way they used to be. Barbecues, block parties, stuff like that. So what in your experience has been the best way to replicate some of the
Oh,
community
that's
or
a
replace
beautiful
some of those
question.
connections?
Yeah, good question. I want to see more people using I have a side porch. It's not a front porch. That's pretty public facing. It's not a back porch. It's not hidden where nobody can access it through a big tall gate. It's a side porch. And I invite people to my side porch whenever I can think of an excuse. Like maybe somebody's had a bad week, but mostly it's around something going on in the world, like Halloween is coming up. Halloween, you know, you trace its ancient roots. It's for some reason this time of year, there's thin spaces and we're called to kind of be aware of our ancestors, right? Those who've gone before us. So I have a fire pit around Halloween, usually before or after, not on. And I invite a few people over who have lost someone or a pet or experiencing climate grief. Anyone who's grieving, I invite them, ask them to bring a friend, and we sit around that fire and we don't just name them and light a candle for them. We tell the story. And it's dark, so you can cry if you want to. And we make sure there's someone to drive you home if you have that second glass of wine and you don't feel like you should drive. And souls get cared for. And there's a little bit of healing. And so I'm always on the lookout. The winter solstice is another great one. Everyone doesn't enjoy Christmas anymore. Sometimes it comes with too much baggage, too much commercialism. But you can remember that the days are short and the nights are long. And what meaning might that have for you? What gift might that be for you? What might that be telling you about your life? So it's not always the same group of people around my fire pit or on my side porch all of the time. But what I'm trying to do is tell them, you go have your own side porch. You go have your own fire pit. You need some help? Come to me. My website will have some of the ways to lead these practices, not just what they are, but step by step. Here's how you do it. And here's how you kind of take that moment and say, this is what the community needs. It's risky. They may laugh at you. That's okay. Take that risk anyway. Try calling 2 or 3 or 4 people together to in community wonder what the heck is up here and how can we do it better? How can we live through it with joy and healing, not constant anxiety and cortisol levels that are going through the roof?
I want to take 2 steps back on something you said, which was the sort of 1 foot in, 1 foot out of the church. That makes it interesting to me because there's some real precedent. There's a string of people who have done things in this nature. I was thinking about Anne Lamott and Help Thanks Wow and some of her other writings, wherein which she pushes against the church and she also, embraces the parts she wants to. Nadia Bowles-Weber, who is the Lutheran minister who did that really good book about Magdalene and all that sort of a thing. There's a energy in a culture. It seems to often be led by women. Why is
That's
this,
beautiful.
Dori?
That's beautiful. I don't know if I know the why to that, but I will tell you, I'm going to push you back even further before Anne Lamott, who I am happy to hang out with, before Nadia Bolz-Weber, who I have hung out with, to like Catherine of Siena in Italy in the, I can't remember what, maybe the 11th or 12th century, when she, was radicalizing the way the church operated. Hildegard of Bingen was saying God is more in nature than God is in any institution. And it's the greening of spring that we should be worshiping. So I stand in the line of a long, long, long tradition of women who have had the DNA for spirituality and who have pushed against the structures that would contain box in the holy. And I did my PhD, my doctoral work with an amazing Roman Catholic scholar named Rosemary Radford Ruther, who wrote about the many, many different heterodoxies that got squashed and suppressed in order for the church to represent empire. Like, it happened, and some of us never left, and we never have. And there are men and queer people doing it too, and trans people doing it too. But women do hold that. I do think women do hold that well. We're already, because of our gender, oppressed, and we're looking for ways to survive. And survival will lead to creativity and innovation every single time, anytime a group of people is marginalized or oppressed. So, Chris, I think that's where the answer is.
I just visited Hever Castle over the summer, where Anne Boleyn's family was from. And recently, so they have on display there her Book of Hours, which is like part of her, her devotional readings, that kind of stuff. And they recently discovered through the use of UV light that there are signatures and things written in it that had never been seen before, but it mostly shows kind of the chain of custody of who held on to this pretty dangerous book. Like in Henry's time, in the Tudor reign times, it was dangerous to have this book, but you could see it pass from hand to hand. It was women keeping the book safe and being its custodian. And now it's back on display where we can see it. But I just think that that's something like you're talking about. It's women playing a key role in keeping history and spirituality alive.
Yes, I love that. And you'll have to tell me afterward exactly where that is, because I want to go there and see it myself. I would add one other thing. I was talking about, women being an oppressed gender, but much of my learning has been from women of color. So Black women in America who have carved out this beautiful literary path called womanism, Latina women who carved out this beautiful literary path called mujerista, philosophy and theology. And I've also learned an awful lot from Asian feminist women. So they have really gifted me with a bigger viewfinder from white feminism, which tended to be kind of limited to the academy. It didn't always go back and fetch or go back and tend to younger people, because it was like trying to make its way in the ivory towers. And so, especially when I was coming up as a young theologian in the late 80s, it was important to me to learn from women who had really paid attention to the value of home place. That's Black women. Black women braiding their daughters' hair. That was where the best energy of their day. That's what it was saved for. They might have to do whatever labor during the day they had to do, but their best energy was in the kitchen cooking for their family and braiding their daughter's hair. So I've tried to stay close to that and value the everyday acts and the everyday stories of women and girls and boys and men.
My chair keeps going lower and lower. Pretty soon I'm going to be under my desk. So I'm going to fix it.
Dori, one thought I had about this too is that when you brought up women of color and Latino women, especially in some of the other groups, it's also, of course, happening to our trans friends. And so that I know that's another avenue from which you are pulling some inclusivity into our own deep wells and everything. I'm curious to know, what had to change, if anything? I mean, Carrie and I both have trans children. We are both, there's many in the community where I live right now, very small town, which those two things shouldn't go together, but they do. What did you have to sort of do differently, or were you already equipped for it, or like what kinds of accommodation in thought had to happen?
That's a great question. So the first time, my first book was called Girlfriend Theology. Girlfriend was one word. It just came out in a revised edition last year, and now it's girl/friend. Thank you. You saw the slash. And that slash is a moment to pause and realize that the gender binary is a construct and people fall all kinds of places on it. And we're learning so much about it. So what had to change for me was I had to go back to the literature. I had to talk to people who were trusted friends. I had to learn. And then I was open to, like, girlfriend theology is an opportunity to address all gender oppressions that are that are loose in our world, and there are many of them. And so I revised the book to take into account the book is about listening to people's stories, and from the story of their life, coming up with better images of God, better images of spirit, better meaning to kind of guide our lives. We're not stuck with the ones that we inherited. Oops, sorry, phone ringing. We're not stuck with the ones that we inherited. We can keep changing them. Humanity has always created its own meanings, right? It's not downloaded straight from heaven. It's not downloaded straight to us. It comes to us through our lived experiences. But in isolation, that's a scary thing. In community, it can be a life-giving thing. And so girlfriend theology is about sitting down together, hearing one person's story, and then together finding the meanings in that story, not one meaning, but the meanings that, like, they might fit for a day. Let me try this on and see how it works. And you might look back over the course of 5 years and be able to say, wow, the way I defined self-love or self-compassion, when I sat with those 5 people on that day, it's really shaped my life in a better way. I can love who I am differently because of that story on that day with those people. So that's a little glimmer of how it happens.
We're not seeing Annette's comments come through on LinkedIn. Maybe Chris, you can see what they are, but I have a feeling she is loving this. We've known her for a long time, fan of the show, and you are speaking her language right now.
Awesome. Hi,
And
Annette.
this is a show like made for her, and for whatever reason her comments stayed over there. But she was saying, I also do morning pages, and I do Austin Kleon's doodles, and I have all these other processes and practices. And so at least she's here in spirit, Dori. She somehow didn't make the transfer.
Awesome, Annette. We'll connect in some way. But one of the things that I just want to add to what we've been saying here, it is not enough for me to teach these practices to the people who are in my 3 feet zone, right? I want to teach the people in my 3 feet zone to teach it to the people in their 3 feet zone, who will creatively adapt it and change it and work their beautiful mystery and wonder with it and create it with the next 3 feet, and I want that ripple effect, because I want everybody to have in their backpack or their back pocket 4 or 5 practices that they know they can do when they feel their anxiety going up. And some of them might be these longer practices, like call some people around the fire pit and tell a story, but some of them might only take 2 minutes in the middle of the day. They might happen while you're brushing your teeth. They might happen when you have to pee or when you have to hydrate. One of my favorite practices is called May You Never Thirst. And we do it with a group of people with a ragtag group of glasses of water. I buy them from the Goodwill. And we let the water sit together for a little minute. And we remember what some people say about the way monks and mystics throughout time, when they meditate over water, it changes its physical structure. And there's people these days photographing it and showing how that works. So we just do that. We meditate with the water a little bit, and we imagine, what if it's changed just from being with us? And then, like, let's have a sip of it. And while we give it to one another, we say, may you never thirst. It's just a sweet little way of starting a meeting or a day. But then every time during the day when I go to drink my water, I remember Livy saying to me, may you never thirst. And it pings something in my brain. And I think that's probably dopamine or serotonin.
I'm going to switch up stuff, because I usually do like a bring your own salt lick. So maybe I should start bringing water to that.
Yeah, there you go. I have one other one. I just want, go ahead, Chris, sorry.
No, I was just going to say, I like that practice though, because it really sort of, it digs into the Our Own Deep Wells mindset, which is, I mean, you thought about that from this canoe trip back in Minnesota. You brought it forward. You've, added sort of the history and the context. You've the Vedic practices that could also align to it. So there's this really great kind of mulching, sounds like a terrible word, but I mean it in the best of ways, like, really gluing everything together. I'm going to roll that into a question though, Dori. you've been at this, May was a year specifically of our own deep well. So now we're heading towards a year and a half, rolling into the 2025. What's the future for our own deep wells? What's your plan?
Oh, that's a really good question. Well, I don't do this work alone. I have two co-founders, Nicholas Stephen George, who's a spoken word poet who lives in Richmond, Virginia, and Ana Del Castillo, who is a healer, community healer who lives in Washington, D.C. And branching out from that, there are now a group of stakeholders and a growing collective of people who are contributing to the practices, teaching the practices. We're training a group of young adults to teach them so that it's not just me teaching them, but and as they get taught, of course, they get co-created. So we will be rolling this out to mostly our primary audience is student life professionals on college campuses who are at the front lines of the mental health epidemic, and they're not really equipped and they don't really have the time. So what we want to do is say, anytime you're facilitating a group, here's a practice, try this, and remind people, not only give them the practice, but remind them that they can try it out again. So we're creating a deck of cards for leaders so that they can have them at the ready and be reminded, oh yeah, what was that practice Dori taught us? Oh, here it is. Here's step 1, 2, 3. So those will live on our website, and they'll also be printed, copied versions to help people remember to what they are, how to do them, and how to creatively adapt them. That's one of the things in our future. The other thing we found is that it's not only young adults, back to your original question, Carrie, who are struggling. We find that there's an audience for this among community leaders and civic leaders who are leading through super divisive times. These are practices that can be used at the beginning of a board meeting. They're not religious, they're secular, they're spiritual. They're just like Eastern meditation, which has crossed that superhighway. What we're doing is making more robust and more representative the toolkit or the backpack from which what's in the backpack that you can draw from doesn't just have to come from one spiritual tradition. It can come from all of them.
Well, we have to do one very important thing.
Oh, and here's our person of the day. Kaboom!
Who's it going to be, Christopher?
Oh, me. We're going to give it to Annette, whose comment didn't even come across the divide, but this is such a show for her, Dori. So we're going to give it to our pal Annette Mason over on the other platform, catching us on LinkedIn today. Dori, we've come to the part of the show where we ask every guest the only question we ask the same every single episode. So everybody from some of our Horacio Garcia Rojas, the actor from the Ablero, all the way down to Mr. and Mrs. Claus, which is what goes in your backpack. It could be something physical. It could be something metaphorical. Carrie, what's a physical thing you could add to a backpack?
Oh, an avocado.
What's something that you could add that's spiritual or metaphorical?
Kindness.
Oh, good.
Kindness to the backpack.
So, Dori Baker, what can we add to the backpack from you?
Here's my desire for everyone, that we would have 5 soulful practices in our backpack at the ready that we can pull out when we feel life is too much to handle because of the hurricane, because of the war, because of the mass shooting that we just heard about. What can we do? What can we have in our backpack at the ready that we know we love, that we can whip out and use to calm us so we can be of any good to ourselves or the people around us?
Love it. That sounds super good. Well, I was raised Catholic, but it didn't take. I did some time in that church, and my grandma would drag me there. And I can tell you that the real spiritual practices, the real thing I was getting, the real soulful experience I was having was across the street at a Dunkin' Donuts. And so I will tell you, Grammy had the best possible end cap to spirituality over a powdery donut. And here's what she used to say to me.